Hello, hello. All right. So I am just going to put in what we're talking about. Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
good. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Thanks so much for joining me and those of you who are tuning in. Hello, hello. Um, so, so this little chat tonight, super excited. We are gonna continue our conversation about LGBTQ plus horror. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the book. Some of the juicy interview and details we'll save for the interview that we did, and
Mm.
we can share more with the audience about that. And then I just kind of want to see like what your thoughts are about Jennifer's Body. I personally love that
Yeah,
movie, and so
me too.
with like now I've read the essay a couple of times, like after reading it initially, and then when we had our interview. So lots to pick out there. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Joe Vallese. I am the editor of It Came from the Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror, which was published by Feminist Press almost 2 years ago. I think October 4th was our date. So we're kind of celebrating the 2 year anniversary here, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it's a collection of 25 queer and trans writers reflecting on the horror movies that informed and complicated their queer experience and identity. We also have a UK edition published by Sarah Ban Books that has 26 essays and a new foreword by Kirsty Logan, who is a cool Scottish witchy writer. And she adds a new piece about a movie called Raise that I had never seen until she wrote about it. And yeah, so it's really exciting. The book also has illustrations by Bishak Sam, which are sort of like scenes or like moments or images from each essay, almost like in a vintage movie poster kind of vibe, though it's like black and white animation, and it's really cool. So I strongly recommend if you're thinking about getting the book that you get a physical copy because between the cover and the interior illustrations, it is really something to like really hold in your hands and have on your bookshelf. Has a beautiful hot pink spine.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's I'm very, very proud of it. I'm so thrilled that 2 years on, it's still finding new readers and it's kind of between Pride Month and the spooky season, it kind of has a seasonal resurgence, and I hope that that is true for years to come.
Yeah. Yes. Uh, Workers Reading, aka my friend Charlie, she said that it is so gorgeous. Yes, I love all of the artwork and the cover. I initially got the audiobook, which I loved also,
Yeah,
because you mentioned in our interview. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the audiobook, and then we
yeah,
can
yeah.
come back?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, the audiobook was awesome. It's produced by Blackstone Publishing Media. Um, and it was such a delight to get the offer for it because I didn't think an anthology could have an audiobook. And they came to us with an idea. What if we did this with multiple narrators? So all the pieces are narrated by a different queer um, audiobook actor. So it's amazing. It's there's 25 essays, and I think there are like 16 or 18 different voices. So a few of them repeat, but generally speaking, almost every one is its own unique voice. Gay, lesbian, bi, uh, trans, non-binary actors, and they did a really interesting job kind of matching the reader to the piece, and it's just such a different experience. It's so cool to have the book, but then also to listen to it, and it feels like two different collections almost when you hear it because they really are performing the pieces, and that kind of theatrical, dramatic tinge is really fitting because this is a book of queer writers writing about film and experience. So to have sort of these professionals do this just beautiful job, it's so cool. It's like I'm so proud of the book, but I'm like weirdly almost even prouder of this production
Hmm.
that happened sort of. I am still shocked that we have an audiobook and it's awesome, and you can buy it. You can buy an old-fashioned disc or you can download it, but I think it's also available for free if you have Spotify and maybe some other streaming platforms, but it's really awesome.
Yeah, I think it's available on Libro
Oh, cool.
FM, which is like an indie book. They support indie bookstores and
Yes, don't go to Spotify, go there instead.
yes.
I don't even have
Well,
Spotify anymore, so it's yeah.
well, yeah, so I mentioned the audiobook because I got that initially and then I had to get a physical copy, and
Yeah,
that really just added so much to the experience.
yeah,
Well, so we can briefly talk about maybe some of your inspo. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we want to save a lot of the details about the book specifically for the interview, which I hope
yeah.
that if you're watching the replay or if you're watching live, that you got a chance to check it out. And if not, then, it's still there and hope that you get a chance to look at it as well. But so what kind of inspired you to write the book and to start the collection?
Yeah, first, just to echo you and plug the episode that we did together. It's such a good conversation. I had so much fun. We covered so much ground. So please go listen or watch or both. Subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Um,
Yes,
but
thank you.
yeah, but the inspiration, the short answer is that it is the book that I wanted to read for a really long time. I was saying to you, kind of my stock line is that I've been waiting and waiting because I wanted to read personal essay, personal narrative by queer writers thinking about the horror movie. And though there is a lot of interesting queer criticism and queer readings and queer theory, that horror and monsters, and I'm so glad that that work lives in the academy.
Hmm.
I was looking for more accessible writing. I once described it as accessible film criticism or like
Hmm.
emotional film criticism, and that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted the writers. So there's like criticism and interpretation and analysis like inherent in the pieces, but it's really not only the film is evidence, but the personal experience is evidence. So that's what I really wanted to read. And I was just like, I can't find anything like this. There's very little writing like this. And I kept, one of the funny things, I mean, writing any book, but especially like an anthology where you're trying to piece together something and it takes a really long time to uh, get the work that you want and sort of assemble it and have it be realized.
Hmm.
While you're doing it, you don't know if somebody else is doing it. So you kind of have to go on this like, hope that nobody else has the same idea as you and isn't in a parallel universe, like doing the same thing. So
Hmm.
I had a lot of anxiety that I was gonna like miss my spot because it took like 5 years from idea to publication. Um, but I wanted to read it, and because I couldn't find it, I said it's time to be a good gay Virgo and do it yourself. So that's what I
Hmm.
did. I got to work and I said, all right, I got to make this happen because I'm waiting around and I don't see it. The longer answer, although I'm going to be short about it, is that it's kind of just the culmination of my identity. I thought about doing my own book of essays, but that sort of felt lonely and also limiting and sort of like antithetical to the idea of what I actually wanted the book to be, which was sort of a
Hmm.
collective queer memoir,
Hmm.
sort of dealing in the same, like swimming in the same pool, but with very different leaps and, moves throughout the waters. And so it just made sense to do an anthology instead. So instead of writing my own book, it was about making a book
Hmm.
collaboratively with others. And so, but it feels like the culmination of my identity and my interest because I've always loved horror, always, always, always. My father raised us on it. I'm one of four kids. My dad loves horror movies,
Yeah, my
and
sister
watches the
is
most
a
obs
huge horror fan as
yeah,
well.
and like it rubs off, and and I was sort of like it sounds crazy to tell people this, but like I was like 6 and I went to go see Hellraiser 2 on Christmas Day with my dad and my uncle and my siblings. Like you can't get less Catholic than that, right? And yet and but I felt sort of safe around horror because it was just such a part of our family's life. So even though some
Hmm.
things scare me, Hellraiser was one of them, Pet Cemetery was another. A few
Yes.
movies would really, really scare me. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like there were some things that just got me like grossed out and uncomfortable. But generally speaking, I just had such an affinity and such a love for the horror movie. But at the same time, I also knew, and I think most or many queer people would say that even if you don't have the language for it when you're young, you can feel something in your stomach, in your bones that says, I'm not quite the same as everybody else. And for me to have two very cis het girl crazy brothers who played sports, were Italian from New Jersey. Like I had a very specific kind of male vibe around me.
Hmm.
And so I could really sense by contrast that I wasn't the same as them. Um,
Right.
and so that was always running kind of parallel to it. So to reconcile those two pieces of my identity, and I write about it more in the introduction at greater length, sort of worrying that my love of horror movies was actually just sort of like a internalized homophobia, that I was like trying to hold on to some like beard of masculinity, like something that like dumb straight guys love, like boobs and blood, right? Like
Right.
but knowing that wasn't really my connection to it, I thought maybe it wasn't for me until I got older and started, this is back in like the late 90s, going in AOL chat rooms and forums and meeting other queer people who loved horror movies and had these radical readings. And I didn't realize it was such a subculture. And then I got to college, I met other people who loved horror as much as I did. And then I realized, okay, this is actually something that you don't have to put away. This is something you can actually reclaim and do more with and insert yourself into. And obviously, that was like 20 years ago, more than that, and things have changed so much.
Hmm.
And I like to think that it came from the closet is helping to both extend the dialogue, but
Hmm.
also has maybe instigated new conversations. So I feel like it was just the right time. Like the pop culture landscape with queerness and horror was starting to change, and also because people were paying attention to it, they were craving more voices talking about it. And so I feel like it came from the closet because it really is the first book of its kind, and I'm so proud of that. Sort of gives even more legitimacy to this dialogue and this piece of pop culture, because it goes beyond pop culture, because it also, horror movies have always been subversive. They've always had social commentary. That's why it makes me
Hmm.
laugh when, like, assholes will say, like, "Oh God, another woke horror movie." It's like, go look at Black Christmas, right?
Right. Like, did you watch
That's
it?
literally a slasher about abortion, like literally in the wake of, Roe v. Wade, like, you know, um, and there's just so much. Like the original Candyman is about gentrification and appropriation and race relations, and like it, sort of took the spiritual sequel that Nia DaCosta did a few years ago, to really kind of hammer it home. But it's there, it's been there, right? And maybe
Hmm.
it's just that the lens and the gaze of who is telling those stories has shifted. But horror movies have always been about social commentary. They've always been about talking about darker elements of society and oppression and marginalization, and just doing it through like the greatest, most fun allegorical form you can find. So it just feels like it was just the culmination of the right moment. And it's so gratifying to see that there are just like forthrightly queer narratives in film, horror film especially being embraced. And we have to, even if a movie's not great, we got to support it. Like, I'm looking at you, they slash them, sorry. But like, you have to like, we have to show up for it so there can be more of it, and then we
Yeah.
can say, oh, that was a bad one and this was a great one, right? Like we need to like keep reinforcing it. But yeah, I could say so much more about it, and I do in the episode. So please go listen or watch. We talk about everything.
Yes.
It's great.
available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah,
I did want to go back to one thing that you were touching on, and that's that subversiveness, and that's
yeah,
something that we always see in horror films, but definitely through that queer lens.
yeah,
And one of my favorite subversive horror movies that we're talking about this evening
yeah.
is Jennifer's Body. I'm curious, those who are watching, what is your favorite horror movie? I think that if I had to choose one, it Jennifer's Body is definitely like top three.
Wow,
Um,
that's cool.
because I absolutely love it. I was actually just like before this watching like a video essay about
Mm,
like, subverting the monstrous feminine. And I think that the more that I rewatched it for the episode, and then, I read the essay by Carmen. I'm sorry, forgive me.
Carmen Maria Machado.
Yes. So I read the essay, and so I've just been able to like redigest Jennifer's
Hmm.
Body so much. And I feel like
Redigest. That's a funny choice of words.
I'm redigesting
Yeah.
Jennifer's Body, and it's so good. Like I just love the subversiveness, because eh, the monstrous feminine and like all of these stereotypes and traits that women are expected to have or
Hmm.
often do in cinema through horror, that it just takes all of that and just flips it and like, that's not what we're doing actually. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And no, Charlie, Sharknado 3 does
Tornado 3
not
doesn't
count.
count. Hey, everybody can have their own kink when it comes to horror, okay?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
I
Um,
yeah, sorry.
Sorry, just those who are just joining us, we were asking what is your favorite horror film? We are discussing Jennifer's Body. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's great. So, redigesting actually is an important phrase, kind of a pun given what happens in the movie.
Right.
Spoilers, for anybody who hasn't seen it. But I think that, you and I speak quite a bit in the podcast episode about reclamation, how the queer community sort of reclaims through our queer reading of something. Often it's something that is so offensive that it kind of loops back to being a queer thing. Now, I think that Jennifer's Body it's funny because it's subversive in a lot of ways, but in some ways it's also really plainly queer,
Hmm.
even though, it might not have felt that way when it was first released. And Carmen Machado's essay is really interesting. It's called Both Ways, and it does this really interesting look at the accusations of queer baiting or bisexual baiting
Hmm.
um, in Jennifer's Body, and she does this really interesting analysis. Although it's written in a very familiar, accessible way. And Carmen Machado is super funny and super sexy, but also has really interesting um, sort of somber points that she's making as well. And she integrates
Yeah.
personal experience quite beautifully. But one of the things that she discusses is how part of the reason that Jennifer's Body flopped was because they sort of misjudged how who wanted to see it, and it turned
Hmm.
out that, the quote, I'm going to get it wrong. I should have had the book in front of me. But she says something like, the studio misunderstood, and that, boys didn't want to be eaten by Megan Fox. Like they didn't like, there wasn't like, they weren't interested in this idea of her as like a monster who is eating and consuming them. And I think that the film, it touches on rape culture, it touches on um, female friendship and the tension that is sort of inherent, but also like the notion
That
that,
queer teenage girlhood. Yes.
yeah, that specific thing that girls can like get away with, or the culture has sort of been permissive, of course, because it's, through the male uh, the straight male gaze and also like straight male permission structure that
Right.
girls can make out and girls, this like fantasy that, oh, this must be what girls are doing by themselves,
Right.
right? And so it's definitely poking fun at that and quite satirically commenting on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's also, when you rewatch that film, and certainly it was true for me when I saw it after many years, it is like really disturbing what happens to Jennifer. And when we finally like see like what I don't want to spoil it too deeply because if somebody hasn't seen it. Um,
It came
but
out in
what
2009. I feel like
Okay, okay, okay.
it's
All right, all
safe.
right. Yes. And yes, the studio failed in the marketing strategy. I agree. Queerdo Babes, Powderama, totally. Invite me on. That sounds like a cool podcast. They totally failed. The marketing strategy was all wrong. And
Yeah.
also, when you actually watch it, it's quite disturbing. Her murder, that her sacrifice by the satanic band that wants fame, goes awry. But those moments leading up to, her being like lured into that van are they're just full of dread, and Needy, played by Amanda Seyfried, is just so convincing as the concerned, scared friend. But there's also that like sisterly and motherly thing of like looking out for each other, but also not judging each
Mm-hmm.
other. And that sort of, leads to Jennifer's fate because Needy wants to stop her, but also is not like not assertive enough because Jennifer is hot. Jennifer is kind of the opposite of Needy. She's dark
Right.
haired, promiscuous. Needy is um, blonde and mousy and has a very, very sweet, dorky boyfriend. So they're
Mm-hmm.
they're they're best friends, but they're so different from each other. And so there's also a commentary there about Needy's, you're like, who's in love with who? Is Needy in love with Jennifer? Is Jennifer in love with Needy? Are they in love with each other?
It's
Or do they actually,
very like codependent.
yeah.
Definitely codependent.
But as the movie progresses, like, do they love each other or do they hate each other? Do they want something from each other? Does each kind of envy the thing that the other is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's just kind of scratching the surface. There's so much that goes on in that film, but it's super rich, and I think that upon its first, I think it was treated in sort of a people viewed it in a pretty shallow way, but we're also in a different place culturally too. Like things
Right.
change a lot in 15 years. So and you couldn't divorce the persona of Megan Fox from the film. So in some ways, though she's perfect in it, one has to
Mm-hmm.
wonder if the casting of Megan Fox was like ironically the thing that caused the film to be disregarded or something, right? Like they couldn't like people couldn't see like really give her the credit for, you know, probably the best acting she's ever done, maybe
Yeah.
the best role she'll ever have because it's so iconic, right?
Right.
Um, I'm saying a
I
lot,
think
but yeah, yeah.
I think that kind of like adds to the conversation of what's being like kind of satirized or
Hmm.
like, some of that subtext that comes from the movie.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, the movie is literally called Jennifer's Body and like, really speaks to the
yeah,
exploitation of her body as she's
totally.
sacrificed to the devil. But also in, we talked about the marketing that they were marketing to teenage little boys who didn't want to be eaten by Megan Fox, but that like we were in a much different place as a
Yeah,
society, I
yeah.
think. And I also like, a couple of episodes back, I did the research on the movie Frida, which came out in
Mm,
2002, so a little bit earlier. But
yeah,
Salma Hayek has been very open about, the misogyny and all of her really awful experiences with Harvey Weinstein. And ever since then, I feel like most often when women are making films, that level of misogyny and kind of censorship that female directors,
Yep.
writers, all of the people that they often experience. I feel like then, especially, and in 2009, that it was the rule and not the exception.
Mm-hmm.
And that, Harvey Weinstein was just the one that got caught,
Totally.
but years later. So, I think about that now every time that I kind of like am critiquing, and not necessarily like in a negative way, but like,
Yeah,
just to look at the subtext of something. And I think that that definitely played a role in the marketing. Um, but Megan
absolutely.
Fox, she was in a Transformers movie like the
Right.
same year. So
Right.
um,
Oh, that
I
was the
I feel like
same year. Wow. Okay.
well, I think it was like the second
It was the second
Transformers
film.
movie
Okay.
came
Okay.
out
Okay. Got
that
it.
year.
Got it.
So it's kind of hard for her to like get away from her
Yeah.
own image in that aspect, but it really just kind of like to me adds to the movie and that subversiveness. I did want to go back to what you said about like when she sacrificed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that we were talking about like tropes in horror that often women are supposed to be like the idyllic virgin, the final girl
Right.
who makes it, and any kind of like promiscuity is definitely demonized or othered,
Right.
um, and she lies and says that she's a virgin, but that's ultimately like what leads to her kind of
Right.
transformation into
Totally.
this boy eating monster. And so I really appreciate that about the film and many, many other things.
Totally.
And so I do have an episode coming out next Wednesday about
Nice.
Jennifer's Body. I'll be joined by my good friend Evan. He's at Left of the Projector Pod. He does like leftist critique movie stuff. And then my friend Alex, who does labor union work and is an organizer. So
Nice.
I hope that you'll get to check that out and everyone watching as well. Um, did you have any other like final thoughts about Jennifer's Body? And we can share where you can find the book, and where they can find you.
Yes. Just one thing I want to go back to very
Yeah.
quickly that I think was so smart that you said. You know, we forget that, or we don't forget. We know very actively that society loves to punish successful women and to
Mm-hmm.
knock them down. And Diablo Cody won an Oscar for writing Juno a few years before this, and
Mm-hmm.
this was right. I think her next project. And Karin Kusama, who's an incredible director, had a really hard time kind of making movies after this. I think that I can't remember if Aeon Flux with Charlize Theron was after this or before it, but she had sort of two like not really successful films, which have sort of appreciated really, really nicely over time, but it kind of
Mm-hmm.
set her back quite a bit. And I think that there were so many people who said that Diablo Cody didn't deserve her Juno win, and so it just
Juno is a
feels
great movie.
yeah, that script, it's very much of its time, and talk about retrospectively being a queer classic to think about Elliot Page now and to
Right.
like think about that film in relationship to their identity and sort of their evolution is pretty amazing. But yeah, I just felt like there were people who couldn't wait to knock Diablo Cody down a peg,
Right.
and I think that that is a big reason why media kind of coalesces around negativity, and it happens all the time. And often there's some internalized misogyny that women play a role in, and I would not be shocked if we went back and found a bunch of reviews that were negative, that were also written by women, in addition to men, because I think that sometimes there's this idea that you can't, because, people weren't even saying the word feminist much in
Right.
2009. Like
Right.
it was, oh, I believe in this and this, but I'm not a feminist, right? That was a big thing in pop culture, musicians, women were sort of, led to believe they couldn't sort of announce themselves as a feminist. And with that, I think, it came a lot of unfair criticism, sort of intragender criticism, that I think now we would be embarrassed by
Right.
or know that it's
Like
not
that's
not
cringe. We
it's
support
not
women,
totally
okay?
it's not okay, you know. Anyway, so that was a smart observation. I totally agree, and I think the context of that is really important. Yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
and
yeah. No, good.
well, and like that goes back to the Harvey Weinstein thing. Like
Yes.
he owned the
Right.
Oscars. Like,
Yep.
he just his reach in Hollywood, like it's so underestimated. I
Yeah.
mean, he had Miramax, which was thriving, and like, he had all these different production companies, and he was directing and producing, and so like not just him as one person, but I think about like his influence, the people
Yeah.
he worked with, and like, when that goes unchecked, that then it grows and it festers, and it happens in other scenarios. And so I think that when we do look at films by women, that's something that we have to keep in the forefront of our mind, is that
Yeah.
what were the conditions that we were in at the time, so that we can
Yep.
like properly analyze it.
Totally, totally. And one thing about, although he's one of my least favorite subjects, but the thing about Harvey Weinstein too is that we know now he ruined or derailed so many careers. Mira Sorvino's career, Annabella Shora, who I loved so much, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Jungle Fever. She was such like a fixture of '90s for me, and I always wondered like what happened to her. She was so incredible.
Hmm.
She is incredible, and then to find out that she was so brutalized by him, and then gaslit, and then blacklisted, and just is horrible. And uh, Mira Sorvino, I was listening to her on an interview. She won an Oscar, and then
Hmm.
it's like Harvey thought he was owed something because he got her Oscar,
Right.
and when she was not responding to him, he got her removed or told Peter Jackson allegedly that she was difficult and not to cast her in The Lord of the Rings. So I think the part that Kate Blanchett got was supposed to go to Mira Sorvino. So,
Wow.
you look at sort of these like sliding doors, alternate realities of who could have been in what movie, and I shudder to think how many films. Kate Blanchett is amazing, obviously, but when you think about like somebody else had to suffer or be punished for somebody else to have that opportunity, that vindictive quality, that spite is just so evil. Um, I don't know. There could be a great slasher movie inspired by the Harvey Weinstein. Maybe I'll write it someday. But we could go on and on about that. But yeah, that's a
Well,
really
and
relevant point.
that's why it's so important what you've done with your book and putting together this beautiful collection that really leans into that, into our community, and
Yeah.
that it's written by queer and trans writers, put together by the wonderful Joe Vallese, and that it really taps into leaning into feeling that community, and that it's okay that we have this connection to horror, because we feel that othering, and
Yeah.
that
Yep.
like it's totally fine if we're other, we're different, and that's okay. And I love how horror has changed and developed over time, and that we do see that being
Yeah.
embraced much more now.
Totally.
So tell the good folks where they can get their copy, because if you haven't read it by now, hopefully we've convinced you to at least take a peek into some of the
it's
wonderful essays.
It's never too late. Yeah, it came from the closet. You can find it at feministpress.org. They're doing actually a spooky book giveaway right now on their Instagram, I think, or their Twitter, or both. Um, but you can find it there. You can find it at any independent bookseller of your choice, bookshop.org. Is it .org or .com? .org.
Hmm.
And you can really find it just about anywhere. I'm so pleased that it's actually readily available. I get sent photos from all across the country and sometimes internationally where people find it on the shelves or on display, and they'll send me a shot of it. And often it's accompanied by a note by somebody who works at the bookstore about, how much they love it, and they very often cite Carmen's essay on Jennifer's body. So it really is a special essay. But yeah, but there are just every piece is so different and so cool. And just to end on the note of intersectionality that I think you were sort of touching on, because all marginalized and oppressed and othered people, in some ways, that to me is under the queer umbrella, in general. And we all sort of have a common cause with each other, and need to support each other, and need to make our voices heard, because all these years later, just women's films are still, like every once in a while, like, oh wow, a woman's movie did great at the box office. And it's like, if you let women make movies that have women as central characters, you would see more of that. Because, if you just make one film, every few years that's for women or female audiences, you always, there's an inherent limitation built into that, that is done on purpose, because again, it's meant to, restrict what's possible. And so we have to fight against that. That's certainly true for queer stories. So yeah, let's all support each other. And I hope It Came from the Closet speaks to many people, and many, they see themselves in it. But I also want people who don't identify as queer, to pick it up too, because I think it's actually a really interesting way to learn about the spectrum of queerness through something that is so fun to share, which is the horror movie. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for
Thank
being on.
you.
Thank you
Of
all for
course.
joining us live. And we'll see you the next time.
Awesome. Have a good night.
You
Bye.
too. Bye, Joe. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.